Hey everyone, it's Joe Glines, Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, and Jackie here from Copenhagen, Denmark.
So we this is a different kind of a podcast. So this one actually is meant to be listened to kind of like after the very last one because they're related. The last one we were talking about how our computers, our programs getting harder and harder to automate, less ways to connect to them. And basically where we wrapped up was just talking about how some things have like a COM object, you can do API requests and connect to them, right, programmatically, because they're not local, they're things run in the cloud. And so that was where we wanted to pick back up. And Jackie was trying to give away too much juicy stuff, so I paused him here. So now he's probably going to say, like, I have no idea what the hell I was saying, Joe. But let's get back into the whole, I remember you said, hey, in Excel, in the newer MS Office 365, like VBA is not a thing, right? I believe that's right where we were wrapping up.
Absolutely, and to me that's kind of like, whoa, that's a powerful thing to like let go, right? It's like, I know from my day-to-day office work that maybe 30 people who sit at the computer every day, and I'm the only one who would even think about making a macro in Excel.
Probably the only one in your building, Jackie. But
most likely, and so I do understand why Microsoft might not be that inclined on keeping it, because hey, it's not that important of a part of this. And a lot of companies, if you're a company like Microsoft selling for companies, and companies have a big size, and if my company really had something that they needed to have automated, they have lots of other ways of getting it done. They could either hire a company or a consultant, or using some kind of RPA tool, and So I do understand if Microsoft is kind of like saying, okay, I want people to have access to the core functionality of Excel everywhere from every device, no matter where they are at. As long as they have an internet connection, they can see their Excel sheet, which is one way of seeing it. But it feels like that more power users are kind of losing something in that conversion. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and I've played with a couple. What was one was like, I think, Smart Sheets or something close to that. And they had an API, a web services API. I could programmatically connect to, set values in a given cell, read things, add a formula, and do stuff. Yeah, it was a lot more complicated to do the stuff versus doing it in Excel on my computer locally. There's also, of course, lag time and the other crap you're dealing with. But I think it's an excellent point you made of the number of people actually leverage, even though VBA built in is such an amazingly powerful thing, and COM also, if 1 out of 1,000 people are using it, is it really worth all the resources they put in to make that available? So I think you're right. The other one I wanted to comment on, and actually it's tying back to our last web podcast, was you mentioned something about how things get more complicated and they come back and they get easier, and they get more complicated, get easier. And a minute ago, you were talking about how you'll write a macro, right? You'll consider at least writing a macro or looking at it. And this is one we've talked about in the past, right? I can remember 20 years ago, I was actually writing macros in Excel. And it was a more common thing in the office place.
Yeah.
And it was known by a lot of people, and nowadays it's really like, for the most part, they look at it like it's voodoo, right? They won't even look at something.
I remember learning Excel back in school, maybe. And the natural thing to progress on there was into the macros of Excel. If you wanted to be better than that basic user, that would be the next step. But today, just the thing that I can actually remember the different functions and other parts of functionality in Excel that's not on the home tab makes me a super user. Whereas,
Yeah.
what am I then when
Yeah.
I can actually also make macros?
Yeah. Well,
So yeah.
I stun people when we're in a meeting. I'm like, just hit control one. And they're like, control one. Like, what? I'm like, that brings up like that formatting, the thing. And they're looking for the buttons, right? And then like, they're always like, wow. I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, it's funny. The stuff that just, you and I talk about it, right? I mean, I look at people in the office and I love them to death, but for the most part, the vast majority are so technically, I don't want to say obsolete, it's not the right word, but
No.
boy, they just don't know how to use a computer, right? And I don't mean to blame them, quote unquote, because unfortunately, offices don't even, the businesses don't even pay to even encourage. They don't even encourage, let alone pay it, right? They don't even encourage it, right? So yeah, why would they? But anyway,
Yeah, I remember a time where I don't remember what the it was a thing here where you'd call it a PC driver's license. Um, that it's not correct. It's a translated term, but it's something that a company could perhaps ask that people had just to kind of
interesting.
like, it was when computers were like new in the office place.
Yeah,
So you could take like a small course
yeah,
somewhere and you could get this piece of paper that told a company that I'm able to use a
yeah,
computer at a basic level. So you could start it, you could shut it down, you could open programs, you could maybe write something in Word or Lotus Notes or whatever it was at the time, right? And it made sense, but now it's expected. And people have all kinds of skill levels from the people that are kind of in doubt of where the power button is up until people who are actually able to find and start a macro, right? It's
yeah,
just like
yeah,
the span of people's actual level with the computer, and they all work on it every day.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
so,
that's the crazy part.
yeah, yeah,
That's such an amazing point right there, Jackie. Is the actual amount of usage is probably close to the same for all of them, right? And yet, yeah, the knowledge. Anyway, we're getting off our topic.
oh, yeah,
Yeah, but it was all interesting and fun stuff. So let's think a little bit more about the implication of moving things from a locally run thing, especially for AutoHotkey, right? That's not a good thing to have things run in the cloud. It again, which we talked about, right? We can automate them, and even if we're just doing like the fine text thing or pixel search or whatever, right? We can automate it, but the speed and reliability and how easy it is to actually program go down, right? It's not as good.
yeah. The thing is that with if you take COM as one part of it, where the programming language like AutoHotkey has built-in functions that know exactly where in memory to get stuff
Mm-hmm.
to happen.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah,
That makes a lot of sense, and
right,
it's quick and it's very reliable because
right,
it's built to be able to be worked that way.
right,
When you move it into the cloud, you have so much more security that needs to happen
yeah,
because you don't want to be hacked.
right,
So you need to build an entire API that lets someone externally do something on the server. Like that would be one way of at least doing it.
yeah,
At least until something within the browsers happen. And it's not there currently. We have HTML, we have all of these different things, but most of these programs that become more advanced, like Google Sheets or uh, uh, Office 365, don't really build their views with HTML.
no, obviously,
So
right,
you don't have the same control as you would on a web page that was built in HTML because hey, the second cell on the third row on that's pretty okay to grasp, but when it becomes an HTTP request to a server's API somewhere, where you need to put the correct value to get the correct response, and everything becomes a little less obvious, and in some cases it might not even update on your screen. So you're doing something to some values on a server somewhere that you can't see. And
yeah. But you know what? It just dawned on me, Jackie. I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but you know how, like in Excel or Word or whatever we're doing, we in IE we have the option of making it visible or not visible, right?
Yeah.
And we know from experience, when you don't make it visible, it's so much faster, right? Because it's not trying to update the GUI. Think about how much faster it'll be if we have that kind of an option in the whole cloud thing, right?
Yeah.
To say, don't bother updating my screen, just go do all the stuff for me and show me you're done. Like that'll be an even bigger magnifier, right? It's gonna really make a difference.
Absolutely.
But you're right. The complexities of you telling it to go do something. We used to send one line of code to say make this thing bold, and now we gotta do 8 lines or whatever, right? It's a lot much more complex.
Yeah, and that's fine, but it's just what seems to be happening in programming in general, or at least that's how I'm viewing it, is that where once upon a time it was the idea of making coding accessible. So finding some way of making programming more accessible to people in general, where now it's more like we have this where if you take this long education, you can learn these very advanced versions. We have some less advanced versions, and then we have these all on top versions where it's each time you make that simplifying step, you lose something, right?
Well, yeah. Sorry, I just thought of another great comparison. The whole, what you just described there, we could easily equate it to the Android versus iPhone approach, right? Android, I can tweak things like crazy, right? And iPhones, like it's kind of they make the phone they think you should have, and that's the way it is, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a sign of like more and more things are just like just make all my decisions for me and just give me what you think I should have and don't make me think.
Yeah, and if we take all of what we already talked about, people in the workplace not having that focus on really learning the deeper parts of a program, and you put that to, I just want a device that does what I tell it to with as simple an interface as possible, and someone else will take care of the complexity. And I don't care how complex it is, as long as it's simple for me when I want to do that one simple thing. But we, the intermediaries, or whatever you would call us, we're kind of in the middle of that, where people want to have it as simple as possible, but to get it there, you need to be so complex, or whatever you call that. And it doesn't really leave room for those in the middle, because it becomes so complex to do it, and people want it so simple that those two parts there, that's the place that's hard to be in, or that's how I feel. Yeah.
Just adding on to the irony is, Maestrith has been developing us our both Android and iPhone apps, and he's like, in Android, doing something is super easy, and in the iPhone it takes him, even though the computer is slower, so it takes him longer because of that, but the amount of code he has to write to do the same thing is so much more. And you would think it would be the opposite, right? You would think it'd totally be the opposite because iPhones have locked down their environments and whatever, but I just think it's ironic. But I guess because it's, you're really you're nailing down every little thing about it. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe that's the thing, but it's probably also, I know Android is kind of Google's or Alphabet's or whatever you would call it, but they have so many out there outside of themselves that are looking at it and
Sure.
working with it and stuff like that, where Apple is kind of one more old school
They're the
company, might be.
Microsoft now, right, of what it was.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And so they're developing for their own hardware, so to speak, where that's not what Android is doing, right? And there are still those divides, like there was the Microsoft and the Apple people. Now it's more like they're Android and the Apple people, right? And one is open source, or kinda, and the other one is closed source, or kinda. And it I think that the general idea, and with AutoHotkey, open source just seems to be the better choice for the future.
There's a lot of, it's interesting because I think bigger companies, especially really big companies, hated having open source stuff, right? Yet to your point, it's been proven time and time again that, like, in the long run, what open source actually works, and it works well. You don't have as many, you'd think there's security issues, or I can't have someone that's going to respond and fix something right away, yet yes you can, right? It works.
Yeah, and I understand closed source, because who doesn't want to protect their stuff? But the general idea just that open source might just make more sense in the long run. Yeah. Or so I hope it is, because hey, yeah, I saw it.
Yeah. Anyway. He just said, "Oops." We have I have a public room where just people drop in. It's kind of funny. It's never happened before because it's I have people dropping in this all the time. Actually, that was a good point. I think we kind of wrapped up the second conversation. I got to go anyway.
But, sure.
All right, man. Good stuff. Talk soon.
Bye. Yeah, bye.